Oh, good evening and welcome all, particularly to those who've come from further afield than just Bannister. That's an in-joke. As an outsider, no, nothing from you, Cathy Kittleway. As an outsider, I'm uncertain as to why I was invited, but I'm deeply honoured to introduce Keith Harrison's fine memoir, Not Quite Ithaka, Encounters on the Way. I thank Keith for the trust. I hope that what I say will not be, as in Yeats's expression, polite, meaningless words, although I'm certain that this work will ride easily and confidently carry itself beyond anything I say. So, as the character of Basho's wife in one of Keith's engaging poems says, "Nothing important can be done in 17 syllables, so allow me to begin. This is not a conventional memoir. It is not self-serving or self-indulgent. It has scale, a sense of fitness and proportion of the true place of the self. It is not a record of the minutiae of a life, but rather we are in the hands of a poet who has a clear observing eye for the important details with which to demonstrate his theme. This memoir is composed of vignettes, photographs, which testify clearly to the fundamental importance of engagement through whatever it is that one's hands falls to, whether it's the absorption of a Matisse or a footballer, weightless in midair, the engagement with life. It is in effect a poem, a hymn in praise of the act of living, in praise of restless, unceasing voyaging, of the continual and continuing act of creation. The body and range of work Keith has produced is remarkable, from lyric poetry, dramatic monologues, plays, translations, one in particular being his acclaimed Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. He has rubbed shoulders with the greats like Auden and Ted Hughes. He was one of the organisers for the Edinburgh Literary Festival. He has taught in America and Australia at the tertiary level. He has known, as we all do, tragedy as well as joy, yet in his treatment of these elements there is nothing mawkish or sentimental. They are presented with economy and tact. What is written is exact, appropriate, without flashiness or straining for effect. It is the emotional or psychological truth which governs. As he says in the memoir of a group of his friends, we have raised our families, spent our seasons in hell, experienced the death of loved ones, and are still standing. Yet, what he says of Yeats, he was concerned, particularly as he got older, with being alive in all its imperfections, right here, right now, is true of Keith too. As a poet, he demonstrates his commitment to the art and craft, aware how our human life is dependent on this fragile craft of language. That our lives, where we often spend so much of our time, are provisional. We skate on a thin ice of vowels and syllables, hoping that the skin won't crack and plunge us down into the dark depths from where we might never emerge. I finish these opening remarks with the final three stanzas of a poem called Vitae, or Huite, Minnesota Fall. And it's from his substantial new and collected poems, Changes. All things have their tides and reasons, people and trees, and these queer seasons between two countries where I'm home nowhere and everywhere. As I turn, gripping my hammer in my palm, to patch the familiar roof and walls of my house, of myself, what's gone seems chaff in the wind. I'm on my own, one with the coons, and I suppose with turkeys and the browning rose. Be that as it may, night spreads, it spreads fast. I hurry outdoors and shift my ladder along the wall, testing each rung. I begin my climb through deep doorways between the stars. Thank you. I invite Keith to come and respond to those rather magnificent words.
Thank you very much, Russell.
It was brilliant, wasn't it?
It was brilliant. I have to admit. I mean, I can't follow that out. Thank you so much for all coming along this evening. I'm going to say a few more words of thanks later on, but just wanted to let you know that a couple of days ago, I was lucky enough to get a phone call from my old friend and closest friend, who I met in high school 80 years ago. And there's a lot about him in the book, so I won't go on with that now, but just say that he is one of the most skilled musicians, composers, and general Renaissance people that I've ever met. And his influence on education in music, particularly in Victoria, has been immense. And when he talked to me yesterday, he said he'd composed a piece especially to play for this, and I was so honoured and delighted that I'm going to ask him to kick off the programme. Please welcome Jeffrey Dombrain.
I am allowed to say one or two words before I call on the muses to respond to my memories, my thoughts, my dreams that I've shared with Keith over so many years. But we were very good young fellows at school, and all of a sudden there was something came down from the sky and stood in our midst. And from that time on, we just stood listening to stories all the time that this boy told. I lost touch with him then for a while through university years because we went different paths, and then I heard a rumour. It may or may not have been true, but someone said, "Oh, he's working as a poet, as a gentleman gardener in France." And I thought, oh, that could be so. I've never really checked it. And then one day, just as I got this job as a music lecturer at the Secondary Teachers College, in walks Keith. And he said, I'd been given a fund to do a survey of creativity, and from that time on our links were formed and they became closer and closer. We lived in each other's pockets sometimes with our ideas. We had arguments, we had disagreements, we had joyful unison about so many things. And it's with all of that wonderful, and we wrote a great deal of work together, which was the greatest joy of my life. I must say, the Pira Bird Suite, which we perform all over the world, I must say that the circle now that I enjoy in my fading years is the circle in which Keith is very much the centre. And with that thought, I just want to call on the muses to see if they will inspire me to respond to how I feel about those times with Keith, the times that I look forward to. I have no idea what I'm going to do. It's not written. It's feeling the moment, and I hope the moment will feel me.
I should have asked Jeffrey to end the program because he's always a very difficult act to follow. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, particularly when it's such a sharp evening. And I want to thank particularly Margaret and Jenny and Kirsten for all the work they've done to help make this possible. I meant to mention earlier too that Russell has a book coming out with Pitt Street Poetry Press, and I strongly recommend you keep your eye out for it. It's got some very strong stuff in it. All of you know, I think, that Ithaca is the island off the coast of Greece, which was the starting point for the Odysseus or Ulysses journey all the way around the known world, which in those days was the Aegean. And that was a long time ago, and my book, which is Not Quite Ithaka, implies in its title that I've also made a journey, but it's not quite the same as the original one. And tonight I just thought I'd give you a few samples of what kind of book it is. Well, this book is not chronological, but it does begin at the very beginning of my life, and it ends about now. And in between that time, it jumps around quite a lot. There are quite a lot of what I call crossings. So this is fairly early. The silence inside the light that floods through the white curtains is all around us, while I stand beside my mother's chair, which was rocking and isn't rocking now. And she has in her lap what she calls her knitting, though she's not knitting now because her hands are still. There's no one else in the house, and we're alone in the light. Perhaps the light and the silence are going to tell us why we're here. I can't, so I stand beside her while we listen to each other's breathing and wait for the silence to say something. Now, the person in this next poem is not aware that it's in the book at all. She's never heard it before, and as she's driven all the way up from Melbourne to be here with us, I thought I might give her a bit of a surprise. Helen is our sister, and she's got a needle in her heel. Yesterday the Japanese bombed Darwin, and Helen has a needle. In dark afternoon, a wind rode up the Hawkesbury Valley and ripped the roof from a house a mile away and dropped it on our road. And Helen has a needle deep in her heel because she trod on it hard, and it hit the bone and broke off. And she's only 3, and David and I are crying because they've taken her away. When the wind hurled the roof high in the air over our house, it was like something dropping through deep water. It span in the white-blue air above the paddock, then seemed to hang there a long while. Then it crashed onto the road. All day, wind thrashes itself in the tree by the tennis court. Then the rains come, and Helen is still in hospital when the lights come on and we look out at the black pools that hold the street lights, waiting for any sign of an ambulance that will bring her home. Helen is our sister, and she's only 3, and the needle's still in her heel, and it's broken off, and she's not coming home tonight. I was brought up in Melbourne and Sydney, and then later on went back to Melbourne, and then did my degree at University of Melbourne, and then went overseas. But in spite of all my southern upbringing, my real Eden, or if you like, my real Ithaca, is the north coast of Tasmania under the shadow of Mount Roland, which some of you will know very well, and the town of Devonport. And I remember very vividly, I had 32 cousins at that time, and all our families used to gather there because both my grandparents lived there, and we had a joyous time which will always be with me. Now, I had several pieces about my grandfather, who in some ways is my coroner of a kind of moral talisman. And I can't read them, but I can read one of them. It's not in my voice, but in the voice of his daughter, Aunt Madge, who was born in 1899 and died in 2003. So she was the sickly one in the family, and she died at the age of 104. And this is what she says. Dad used to work on the wharves, you know. Difficult job, especially in summer. Well, one day it's brutally hot and he works so hard that he decides to call into the pub on the way home to wet his whistle. Am I still audible?
Yes.
He almost never does that, but he does this time, and he gets home a bit later than usual to find the food on his plate almost cold. When he leans over to his mother and she smells his beer breath, she turns away and scowls at him. Dad doesn't say a word, just goes outside to cut some wood for the kitchen stove, and he takes his time. When he comes back, Mother's still pouting and showing him her back. He still doesn't say anything. Jax walks over and hoists her up very gently onto his shoulder and carries her along the hallway to the bedroom, Mother kicking the air all the time and spluttering. So there they are in the bedroom. And what does he do next? He lifts her off his shoulder, high toward the ceiling, and sits her on the big black wardrobe he'd made years ago for their wedding. Mother doesn't like this at all, and she hammers the wardrobe with her heels. Once again, Dad takes no notice. He saunters down the hallway, works on the woodpile, and returns to where Mother, who's really furious now, is drumming her heels like mad against the wardrobe. Dad turns and goes outside again, adds a few more pieces to the pile, and this time, when he comes back, the drumming stopped, and she's sitting quite still. He looks up at her and smiles, and she tries really hard not to smile, but doesn't quite succeed. So he reaches up as she reaches down, and there they are on the floor, her head no higher than his breastbone, and he leans over and whispers, "All right, Bill?" And she says, "All right." And they both go back to the kitchen and have their tea. When I was about 15, I had a girlfriend who recommended that I go and visit her Uncle Norm in Wood End near Hanging Rock to do some work on his farm for the school holidays. I think she had an ulterior motive, and that is she wanted to be out of her orbit. But be that as may, I found myself very soon on the train to Wood End, and very soon after that sitting at Norm's kitchen table, which gives on to Hanging Rock itself. "Bloody squawker," Norm says, and quickly disconnects the clip for the battery radio he's brought to life specially at my request. With that, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, not to say the whole history of classical music, are banished into oblivion. Norm's the only man I've seen who can sit at table in a blue work singlet and look graceful. His arms are like an athlete's legs, brown and limber and immensely strong. Slow-moving and definite, he uses words so parsimoniously that it seems he's saving them like coins in a piggy bank for a special occasion. During an average day, he might speak somewhat reluctantly a dozen times. His wife, Phyllis, big-boned and very tall, has the same diffidence with language, and their bond has grown in their years of almost silence together under Mount Macedon. Around noon, Norm has his head inside the hood of his Chevy truck, and Phyllis is watching him. There's a nut on the generator bracket which, despite all his grunting and yanking, won't give. Suddenly the spanner slips and his arm slews with immense force across the fan blade. Blood rushes out of his wrist. He says nothing, just tightens his jaw and keeps trying to free the nut while the blood flows. In a few moments, Phyllis puts her head closer and says, very slowly, "Don't get blood all over your engine, Norm." Her tone implies that this is the most natural of concerns. Norm doesn't react to her or to the mess on the engine. He keeps grunting and wrestling with the nut. At 5 o'clock, with the shadow of the mountain falling across the sheep pens, Norm's at the sheep race, trying to separate the two-tooth wethers from the rams and ewes. He makes a sound like ho when one of them gets stuck in the gateway. It's all very routine until one of them becomes firmly wedged and refuses to move. At this, Norm shouts, "Ho! Then ho! Then ho!" quickly and loudly, a dozen times, his voice rising with each repetition. Then he stops. He leans back on the rail and looks up at the depths of the evening sky, and then begins, rather quietly at first, but with mounting intensity. "You upstrung, dunny rat, piss-drinking son of a jacked-off, pig-farting, curb-brained, bum-headed, dingo-rotting, monkey-faced crotch cannibal, you awful slop! Turd-pushing bollock bag, you slack-doodle, derrow-witted slime sack! Get out of there, greasy toe-ball, sewer swill pen picker bastard! Get out of there right now!" I'm almost 14 and convinced I know all the cuss words in the language. But this is new. This is really new. And Norm's wife and mother-in-law have heard it all so rarely that they run onto the porch excitedly, and Phyllis exclaims in delight, "Norm's swearing!" And the three of us listen while the words rise up to the still sky and seem to bounce off hanging rock. It must be a secret song that he learned for special occasions from his father and his father's father. And now he takes a huge breath and ends the performance with a full orchestral flourish. "You pig-rooting, bugger-faced, ball-squeezing son of a dingo mongrel, I'm going to pull your pizzle through your belly bean hole. I'm going to splatter you with dunny juice, break you in ficking half with the pizzle of a mob wool. If you don't get out of here, get out of there, or I'll push your doodle all the way to Jacksy country. Get all the way from Wombat Hole to breakfast time. Get out of there." Just as suddenly he began, he stops. He goes back to the sheep race and says quietly, "Ho!" Swings the gate once, and the stuck sheep frees itself and makes its way to the right pen. It's as if nothing at all has happened. The silence closes round us, and Phil and her mother go inside, their faces aflame with pleasure. And Norm keeps dividing the rams from the two-tooth wethers until they're all at home in their separate pens. One of the 6 sections in this book is called Crossings, and one of these crossings ends with a plunge into the surf at Sydney after a long flight across the Pacific, which I'd done many times, and this time out of the cold of the terrible, typical Minnesota winter. And it's a poem called "The Huge Wave." The huge wave bowls me over, trundles me up the shingle. It was the same wave took me years ago, and I am home. The same gull hanging motionless above me, pointing east. What winds me back to this wind-blown bay? 16 years under fog and snow, and in that strangeness found a woman in a smoky city. 10 years affection and confusion, and found these children who screech as the edge of the ocean fizzes over their toes. What winds me back where the wind howls, and still the granite headland butts its nose like a brown bull in the combers. During that stay on that particular crossing, or after that particular crossing, I was on my way soon to Pira Arts Centre, where Geoffrey had founded the Pira Arts Performing School. And while I was there, among other things, we wrote a suite for birds, which he mentioned, and it was about the Australian birds. And one piece is called Kookaburra Cannon, and as the name implies, it needs two voices. And I only have one voice, so I've been fortunate to enlist the aid of a poet who lives in Braidwood and needs no introduction to people, any people in this room. Please welcome Harry Lang. Hey, Jack! Mocha cassowary jackanapes, crookaberry car, cookaback snake in your bomberry, merry mottle rubber robber slapstick, car, brown and round as a prowling owl, cookie cracker, macca, knocker, ocker, backer, snap, smake against a flat rock, break his back like a footy sock and yank him up, car, flap to the treetop, slumping all summer with your tummy on your bum, healthy as an apricot, wealthy as a Roman slut, stealthy as a young goanna, track the misty morning in your yellow eye. Hey, Jack! Mocha cassowary, keiko, kiku, kukwam cookie, keiko, ka. Hey, Jack!
Hey, Jack!
Mocha cassowary jackanapes, crackerberry car, cook like snake in your bobbin belly, merry cocky, mottle rubber, slapdick, round and round as a prowling owl, cookie cracker, macca, knocker, ocker, backer, snap, stake against a flat rock, break his back like a footy sock and yank him up, flap to the treetops, slumping all summer with your tummy on your bum, healthy as an apricot, wealthy as a Roman slut, healthy as a young goanna, track, misty morning in your yellow eye. Hey, Jack!
Morning in
Mocha
your yellow
cassowary.
eye. Hey, Jack!
Kiku.
Mocha cassowary.
Cookie.
Kaka.
Keko.
Kiku.
Ka. Ka. Hey, Jack! Thank you very much, Harry. Should mention that Harry and his partner Nicola Bowring run a twice-yearly writers' workshop over at Braidwood, and for those of you who are beginning writers, I think I'd recommend that workshop to you very strongly. Throughout this book, I was experimenting with different ways of telling, you could say. I'm very interested in writing and what you can do with writing. So there are all kinds of experiments. And the last two pieces I'm going to read to you tonight are a kind of a hybrid of prose and poetry. And I've cut out all the extras. So there's something like a literary telegram, you could say. Now I'll give you an example, not from myself, but from a poet in Minneapolis, just to give you a notion of what I mean by hybrid. This is a poem which is very simple, but it's very bare. And it starts like this. I'll just give you the first few lines. Peter sleepwalks and is my brother. Not knows how, but is. Not knows why, but does. Because my father and my mother. I think that's very beautiful, and I thought there's something in this way of writing, so I'd like to try out. And I did that on talking about the two magnificent women who have been so much a part of my life and have shaped much of it. The first is in honour of Inga Christina Yoda's daughter, who for 10 years was my wife and gave us 2 marvellous daughters, and she herself was taken from us about 4 years ago. Now, this piece was written much earlier, and it kind of celebrates the Minnesota Christmas. It starts off with her name. Christina is not my wife, is, because our children, etched in the bones, no flintstone can erase the signatures. Wife, wave, weave, made our children, bred them, brewed, broth, bread, good words, belonging, is their mother, was our daughter's mother, is. Stands there yanking the leash of her huge husky, and our daughters climbing into their womanhood. New York, Melbourne, Minneapolis. Phone calls, ice wind, new children, hair flaming as their mothers and their mothers' fathers' fathers. Ireland, Cornwall, out of tin mines, out of the apple slopes of Tasmania, out of the white hell wastes near Jotunheimen, on and on. What wind out of a Viking hell blew her to my house, to ours, to mine? Years contracting as the coffee brews. The Christmas tree is real again. The red wax candles still dangerous in this huge wooden house. 30 years. It is the same wind heaves through Minnesota and all of time. And Nikos, the husky, yowling to go out and bite it. Courage from her straight-backed mother, a certain stoic pride. Ice in the belly when the days go black with anger and disappointment. Knows heat, the vivid heat of being herself. Wife, womb, woman. Today the winds of was and is blow from the self-same place. So I'll give you the last piece now, which is in the same style, but about another woman whom I knew 70 years ago and then lost track of for about 4 decades and then found again when she came to meet me at Sydney Airport. This piece was originally called Creek, and you'll understand the reason why. If water and a red bird, red stone, breathing in the branches, staring down. If water, sliding over veined rock, in a pulse of sunlight, over our bodies in the water, and bright beads flung skyward from our fingers. If water comes like this, then surely bubbles across our bodies, sun froth. Look down at the signings of the years, puckers, strength drawn away, as from horses in their uphill furrows, with darker voicings now. Stroll, not skip over stones in the starved creek bed further down, waiting for rain. this wearing down also a form of fire. And if it comes as a being, it is always a being here, among flames in the Waratah, banksia cones, twisted sleep of Angophora limbs. Rub our hands against the skins and agree. If water, then surely to love each other is merely a flowing and a letting go. Well, thank you very much for letting me share these pieces from the book with you. And now you'll be able to get a drink and circulate a little bit and talk to each other. Thank you for coming.